You woke up from the illusion and expected to feel alive, but instead, you feel like you're moving through water, slow and heavy and numb. The goals that used to light you up now feel like props on an empty stage. You thought awakening would ignite something in you, but it extinguished the fire instead, and now you're sitting in the ashes wondering if you broke something inside yourself that can't be fixed. This isn't depression. It's not burnout. It's something stranger and deeper. Carl Jung spent decades mapping this exact psychological terrain. The collapse that happens when you see through the ego's game but haven't yet found what comes next. He understood that spiritual awakening doesn't just shift your perspective. It dismantles your entire motivation system, the one you've been running on since childhood. And without that system, you flatline. But here's what almost no one tells you. This flatline is not a malfunction. It's a recalibration. Your psyche is doing something radical beneath the surface. And once you understand the mechanism Jung uncovered, everything about this emptiness starts to make sense. What you're about to discover will change how you see this void, and more importantly, how you move through it. Carl Jung knew this territory well. He mapped it decades before anyone started talking about spiritual awakening on the internet. He understood that when you pierce through the veil of illusion, when you truly see the machinery of ego and identity, something inside you collapses, not in a dramatic way, more like a slow deflation, like air leaving a tire you didn't know was punctured. The problem is that our entire motivation system was built on a foundation that no longer exists. You used to want things because you believed they would make you someone successful, someone loved, someone worthy. But awakening showed you that the someone you were trying to become was just a costume, a mask you wore to play a role in a story you didn't write. Jung called this mask the persona, the social face we present to the world. For years you fed this persona, you worked for it, you stressed over it, you measured your worth by how well it performed. Then one day you looked behind the mask and realized there was no solid self holding it up, just space, just awareness, just being. That realization should feel liberating, and for a moment it does. But then comes the crash. Because if there's no solid self to protect or promote, why do anything at all? This is where most spiritual teachings leave you hanging. They celebrate the breakthrough, but ignore the breakdown that follows. Jung didn't ignore it. He knew this was the most dangerous and most sacred part of the process. He called it the encounter with the void, the psychological death that must happen before true transformation can begin. Your ego hasn't disappeared. It's just lost its compass. It's like a captain whose maps suddenly turn blank. The old coordinates, success, recognition, security, they don't point anywhere meaningful anymore. So your psyche does something radical. It shuts down the motivation engine entirely. Not because you're broken, but because it's forcing you to find a different kind of fuel. This is what Jung meant by individuation, the journey from living for the mask to living from the center. But here's what nobody tells you. Between those two states there's a gap, a void, a dark tunnel with no visible end. And you're in it right now. Your soul is recalibrating. It's rejecting everything that's not authentic, every goal that's performative, every relationship that's transactional, every dream that belongs to someone else's script. This process feels like loss because it is loss. You're losing the false structures that gave your life shape. But Jung would tell you this loss is not the end. It's the chrysalis. It's the soup stage where the caterpillar dissolves before becoming something new. The ego panics in this soup stage because it has no form, no identity, no action plan. It screams at you to get moving, to be productive, to figure it out. But the self, that deeper center Jung spoke about, whispers something else entirely. It says, stop trying to rebuild what fell apart. Let me show you what wants to emerge. This is the phase Jung called enantiodromia, the swing into the opposite. You went from driven to still, from doing to being, from noise to silence. And this swing is not random. It's how balance returns. It's how the psyche heals from decades of living out of alignment. In ancient myths, this is the hermit's cave, the underworld journey, the dark night where the hero sits alone with nothing but their own shadow. Modern spirituality tries to skip this part. It preaches high vibes only and follow your bliss. But Jung knew that the gold, the real transformation, lives in the darkness you're avoiding. He believed shadow integration, the work of facing what you've repressed and denied, is not optional. It's the core of becoming whole, and your psyche is wiser than your ego. It knows you need this pause, this sacred nothingness, so that the unconscious can finally rise and speak. All those parts of yourself you buried, the anger, the grief, the fear, the shame, they're surfacing now because you finally have space to meet them. This is why you feel unmotivated. Your energy isn't gone, it's underground doing excavation work. The void you're sitting in right now is not emptiness, it's actually fullness disguised as absence. Jung understood that what looks like psychological paralysis is often the psyche's way of protecting you from moving forward. With the wrong map, your inner system recognized that the old blueprint was faulty, so it stopped you in your tracks. Think of it like this. You're a traveler who discovered the road you were on leads to a cliff, so your body froze. That freeze response isn't weakness, it's intelligence. The numbness you feel is your psyche saying we're not moving until we find a truer direction. And finding that direction requires something our culture has forgotten how to do, sitting still in the dark and listening. Jung called this active imagination, the practice of opening a dialogue with the unconscious. Not forcing answers, not demanding clarity, but creating space for the deeper layers of yourself to communicate. This is where symbols emerge, where dreams become meaningful, where gut feelings start to guide you more reliably than logic ever could. But it requires patience, and patience feels like torture when you're conditioned to believe that stillness equals stagnation. Here's the twist, though. The moment you stop resisting this in-between phase, the moment you accept that you're in the cocoon, something begins to shift. Not because you did anything, but because you stopped doing the wrong things. You stopped forcing motivation that wasn't real. You stopped pretending you had answers you didn't have. You stopped performing a version of awakening that looked good but felt hollow. And in that surrender, the self, that deeper organizing principle Jung spoke about, finally has room to breathe. If you've been resonating with this so far, if this is naming something you've been struggling with in silence, do me a favor right now. Hit that subscribe button, like this video, and turn on the notification bell to give strength to this channel. We're building a space here for people who are walking the real path, not the filtered version, and your support keeps this work alive. Now let's go deeper, because this is where transformation actually begins. When you stop fighting the void, when you stop judging yourself for not being motivated, a different kind of energy starts to emerge. It's not the adrenaline-fueled hustle of the ego. It's quieter, steadier, more like a river than a fire. Jung would say this is the self beginning to lead, not through force but through resonance. You start to feel pulled towards certain things, not because they look impressive, but because they feel true. You might pick up a creative project you abandoned years ago, not to finish it or monetize it, but just because it wants to exist. You might reach out to someone you lost touch with, not for closure, but because your soul says it's time. You might make a choice that confuses everyone around you, but makes perfect sense in your bones. This is what living from the self looks like. It's not logical, it's not strategic, it's symbolic. You're following the thread of meaning rather than the map of achievement. And here's what's wild. When you live this way, things actually start to happen. Not because you're forcing them, but because you're finally aligned with your own current. Opportunities appear, connections deepen, creativity flows, not because you hustled for it, but because you stopped blocking it. Jung called this synchronicity, the meaningful coincidences that show up when you're living in alignment with your deeper self. But you can't manipulate synchronicity. You can't force it. You can only create the conditions for it by being honest about what's true for you. And that honesty requires letting go of everything you thought you should. It requires admitting that you don't have it all figured out. It requires showing up as you are, not as the polished version you think the world wants. This is terrifying for the ego, because the ego wants control, predictability, a clear plan. But the self operates differently. It works through intuition, through feeling, through the body's wisdom. It speaks in images and sensations, in dreams and gut reactions, in moments of unexpected knowing. And the more you listen to it, the more it speaks. So what does this actually mean for your day-to-day life, for the practical reality of waking up and moving through your hours? It means you start asking different questions. Instead of what do I need to accomplish today, you ask what wants to move through me. Instead of how do I get back on track, you ask what if there is no track, only presence. Instead of why can't I just be normal and motivated, you ask what is this pause trying to teach me? You stop measuring yourself against where you think you should be and start honoring where you actually are. And in that honoring, something sacred happens. You reclaim your energy from all the places you've been leaking it, from people-pleasing, from perfectionism, from trying to live someone else's definition of success. That energy doesn't disappear. It just gets redirected inward where it can do the real work of integration. This is what Jung meant when he talked about withdrawing projections, pulling back all the parts of yourself you've scattered across external goals and relationships. When you gather those fragments back, when you stop giving your power away, you become whole. And wholeness doesn't mean you have all the answers. It means you're no longer at war with yourself. You're no longer split between who you are and who you think you should be. There's a coherence, a quiet integrity, a sense of coming home to yourself. And from that place, motivation returns, but it's completely transformed. It's not driven by lack or fear or the need to prove anything. It's rooted in devotion, in love, in the simple desire to express what's alive in you. You create because creation is your nature, not because you need validation. You connect because connection is meaningful, not because you're trying to fill a void. You move because movement feels aligned, not because you're running from stillness. This is soul-powered action, and it has a completely different quality than ego-driven striving. It's sustainable. It's joyful. It doesn't burn you out because it's fed by a source that doesn't run dry. Jung spent his entire life exploring this source, mapping the terrain of the unconscious, showing us that we're so much deeper and vaster than we realize. And the post-awakening, fog you're in right now, is part of that vastness, making itself known. You thought you were just a person trying to get through life, but you're actually a meeting point between consciousness and the infinite. And that realization doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with silence, with humility, with the slow dissolving of everything you thought was solid. So if you're feeling lost right now, if the motivation hasn't returned yet, if you're still in the gray fog wondering when it will lift, trust this: you're not falling behind. You're going deeper. You're not losing yourself. You're finding the self beneath all the masks. And that self doesn't need you to have it all figured out. It just needs you to keep showing up honestly. The path forward isn't about reclaiming your old drive. It's about discovering a new way of being that doesn't require constant pushing. It's about learning to move with life instead of against it, to flow instead of force, to trust instead of control. And yes, this requires a kind of faith that the ego doesn't understand. Faith that the void is not empty but full of potential. Faith that the darkness is not dangerous but fertile. Faith that you're being guided even when you can't see the destination. Jung didn't offer easy answers because there aren't any, but he offered something better. A framework for understanding what's happening inside you. A map of the territory you're walking through. And that map says you're exactly where you need to be. The loss of motivation after awakening is not a bug. It's a feature. It's the necessary death that precedes rebirth. It's the composting of the old so the new can grow. And the fact that you're here, listening to this, searching for understanding, means you're still on the path. You haven't given up. You're just learning to walk differently. So honor this phase, respect the void, trust the process, even when it makes no sense. Because on the other side of this sacred pause is a version of you that's more whole, more authentic, more alive than you've ever been. And that version doesn't need external motivation to move. It moves from an inner spring that never runs dry. If this spoke to you, If it helped you make sense of what you've been experiencing, leave a comment below and share your journey, and subscribe to stay connected because we're just getting started exploring the depths of what it means to be human, to awaken and to integrate. This isn't the end of your story. It's the chapter where everything changes.